In 1878, the sleepy town of Amherst was the location of Canada's most disturbing demon case, which involved a girl who could have really used the Pope's exorcist. I'm Bleaki, and in today's video we take a look at the Great Amherst mystery, a case of a girl tormented after a horrible encounter with a living person which attracted an evil force and even convinced a skeptic looking to disprove the existence of ghosts that he had just spoken to a damned spirit that had come from hell.
Blue skies around the corner, walk round the corner with me, just round the corner you'll see those blue skies.
This case revolves around a 14-year-old girl named Esther Cox. Esther lived in a large cottage with her eldest sister Olive, who ran the household, Olive's hard-working husband Daniel Teed, who owned the cottage, Olive and Dan's two young boys, Willie and George, aged 5 and 1, Dan's brother John, Esther and Olive's brother William, and the Cox siblings' 22-year-old sister Jane. Basically, they were the Waltons of the Victorian age.
Good night, Jim Bob.
And you think your wait for the shower in the morning's bad? Now, 14-year-old Esther was described as a strange girl who was exceptionally moody, which in all fairness sounds like your typical teenager to me. Just 3 weeks after she was born, her mother sadly passed away and her father later remarried and moved to Maine, leaving his children in the care of their grandmother. Esther grew close to her grandmother and as a result became oddly serious and old-fashioned in her ways. One afternoon, a young man called Bob McNeil, who worked for her sister's husband, asked the teenager if she wanted to take a ride in his carriage with him. At first, Bob seemed kind and considerate, but things turned sour when he pulled out a revolver and ordered the girl to get out of the carriage so that he could take advantage of her. The strong-willed girl refused, and Bob pressed the gun to the girl's body, but before he could pull the trigger, the sound of an approaching carriage disturbed him. Bob came to his senses and took the girl back to Teed Cottage, where she rushed into a room and cried herself to sleep. In the days that followed, everyone around her could see that Esther was upset. Olive and Daniel assumed that Esther and Bob McNeil had argued on their little date, and with Olive not liking the man, she was just happy to see the back of him as he visited the cottage on several occasions, trying to court her sister. Unfortunately, someone else decided to stick around instead. On the evening of September 4th, 1878, Esther and her sister Jane, who shared a bed and bedroom, were getting ready to go to sleep when Jane felt what she thought was a mouse crawling inside the mattress. Terrified, the girls lit the lamp and searched for the mouse, but they couldn't find it. Later that night, the two sisters heard rustling beneath the bed and thought it was the mouse hiding inside a cardboard box that they had kept under there. When they dragged the box out into the middle of the room, it suddenly jumped a foot in the air and landed on its side. The girls screamed for Daniel, who bashed through the door. After hearing the story, however, he began laughing and told them that it was most likely a dream. The next night, Esther, who had gone to bed early after getting a fever, sprang up from her bed in the middle of the night and screamed, "Wake up, Jane, I'm dying." Jane woke up and lit the lamp. To her horror, Esther's face was blood red and her eyes were bulging like something was trying to explode out of her. Jane called for Olive and Daniel, who put Esther back into bed and prepared to call the doctor. As soon as the girl hit the pillow, however, the blood drained from her face before saying, in a choking voice, "I am swelling up and I shall certainly burst. I know I shall." What was more frightening was that Esther's hands and feet were also swollen. Moments before, her face was blood red, but now it was a pale white. Also, she was burning up with a fever, where Jane described her body as being icy cold before she got back into bed. Esther appeared to continue swelling and writhing in agony until a loud clap came from inside the room, followed by 3 loud cracks beneath the bed. This number is important, as poltergeists and demons are believed to tap or bang 3 times as a way to mock the Holy Trinity.
Does it come in threes?
Yeah.
Stops at dawn? Well, sometimes it's meant as an insult to the Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Straight after the sounds, Esther suddenly went limp and her appearance and temperature returned to normal. When they were satisfied that Esther wasn't dead but had somehow passed out, the family went back to their rooms. The next morning, Esther seemed back to her old self again, only she wasn't hungry. Her family members, being unable to explain the strange occurrences the night before, decided it would be best to forget it ever happened. 4 nights later, however, it happened again. This time, all the bedsheets flew off her and her sister and landed in the corner of the room as if they were torn off by an invisible force. Jane had been awake at the time and fainted out of pure terror. Hearing Esther's screams, Olive, Daniel and the brothers rushed into the room. Seeing the bedsheets lying in the corner of the bedroom, Olive grabbed the blankets and put them back over the girls. As she did, they flew back into the corner. Before anyone had time to react, the pillow which Esther was lying on was yanked and hit John in the face. After the supernatural pillow fight, everyone except John fled the room, and Esther's swelling immediately calmed down after 3 loud knocks were heard beneath the bed. The next day, Olive, who didn't know what to do, called a local doctor. Now, the doctor didn't prescribe 3 spoonfuls of holy water and plenty of exercise, but instead laughed and said that the story was nonsense. To prove it, he said he would stay until 1 AM. The doctor arrived at 10 that night and examined Esther, who had already been in bed for over an hour already. He concluded that the girl had suffered a recent shock lately and that her nerves were in a really bad state. Well, yeah, having a gun pointed at you and an invisible force blowing you up like a party balloon will do that to you. As he gave his advice, however, Esther's pillow moved to the side until one of the corners was tucked under Esther's head. The doctor was then left stunned as the pillow moved back into its original position without the girl moving an inch. John stood beside the doctor and said if it happens again he would hold on to it. As if challenging the young man, the pillow slid out on its own again. John grabbed on with all his might, but could not stop it from moving back into the original position. John was frozen in fear. Not long after, 3 knocks could be heard from under the bed again, but after investigating, the doctor couldn't determine what made the noise. The doctor began pacing the room, questioning everything he believed in, until he heard the sound of footsteps behind him. Straight after, everyone in the room could hear scratching on the wall behind the bed. As they all looked over, they gasped to see the words, "Esther Cox, you are mine to kill," carved into the wall. In the 3 weeks that followed, the strange activity increased in intensity. The spirit tormenting Esther would even throw objects at her like potatoes and wooden planks, and John thought a pillow to the face was bad. When the family members were around, it seemed that the banging noises got worse throughout the house. The doctor, who prescribed morphine to Esther in order to calm her nerves, went outside during one of these banging sessions to get some air, and thought he could hear someone banging on the shingles of the cottage with a hammer. When he looked up, no one was there. One night in September, during another active night, Esther had a seizure and became icy cold and rigid. While semi-conscious, she told her family about her frightening ordeal with Bob McNeil. When Esther finally woke up, her family members told her what she had said. Although Esther had no memory of telling the story, she broke down in tears and admitted it was true. Shortly after this incident, Jane noticed that the knocking seemed to be a reaction to certain things that were said, as if the spirit could understand what they were saying and wanted to communicate. Daniel decided to test this theory and asked the mysterious force to knock once for every person in the room. Sure enough, the supernatural entity knocked the correct amount of times, each one getting more louder than the last. Over the following weeks, Daniel communicated with the ghost by telling it to knock a certain amount of times. 1 knock was for a negative answer, 3 times were for a yes, and 2 times was for unsure. Throughout October, the news of the haunted attracted clergymen who witnessed the hauntings themselves. A Baptist minister visited the house who believed that the shock and negative emotions from the Bob McNeil incident turned her into a kind of paranormal battery which was powering a negative spirit. Another man of the cloth, a Methodist preacher, claimed to have seen several manifestations in Teed Cottage. The most disturbing was a bucket of cold water sitting on a kitchen table that started bubbling and frothing like a ghost-powered kettle. By the end of the month, people were flocking to the house to see the haunting for themselves. Many claimed that it was just a hoax, while others thought Esther was somehow hypnotising them in order to make them see and hear what she wanted them to. Many, however, felt that the paranormal activity was genuine. The activity continued until Esther became sick. In the 2 weeks it took to recover, the hauntings appeared to stop. When she was better, she decided to spend time in Sackville to visit another sister who was married. During those 2 weeks, there was no activity in the house. When she got home, however, the activity continued again, now worse than ever. Not only were there bangs and objects being thrown, but now lit matches falling from the ceiling were hitting the floor and the bed, something the whole family witnessed. On one occasion, while Dan, Olive, Jane and Esther were in the room, one of Esther's dresses, which had been hanging from a nail on the door, rolled itself up and then shot under the bed, where it burst into flames. On another occasion, while Olive and Esther were alone in the house making butter, a fire started in the cellar. Unable to put it out, the girls went out into the street and frantically called for help. A stranger ran in and put the fire out with a mat from the dining room. The girls tried to thank the man, but after hearing the tales of Teed Cottage, ran out the front door. Things continued to get worse over the following weeks, when the spirit began speaking to Esther, although she was the only one who could hear the ghostly words. Then, one cold winter night, while the family were hanging around in the parlour, Esther suddenly rose to her feet with a look of horror on her face. She lifted a finger and said, look there, can't you see it? My God, it is the ghost, don't you all see him?" The other family members couldn't see who or what the girl was pointing at. The ghost then went on to speak to Esther, telling her that it would burn the house down unless she left that night. Although none of the other family members could hear the ghost, Dan Teed did not want to take any chances and asked a neighbour who had expressed a great interest in the haunting if she could stay with him and his wife. The couple agreed, and Esther moved into the neighbour's home that night. Several weeks passed, and the haunting seemingly stopped. That is until one day, while she was scrubbing the floor of her new home, the brush she was using just vanished from her hand. She told the lady of the house what happened, and after frantically searching, couldn't find it. When they gave up, however, the brush fell from the ceiling and grazed Esther's head. Soon after, mysterious fires began appearing in the house. Not wanting to lose his house or put the life of his wife in danger, the neighbour moved Esther into the pub he owned. Here, the activity continued, with drinkers of the pub being witnesses. One of the most frightening accounts involved a small pocket knife belonging to the neighbour's son, which shot off a counter and stabbed Esther in the back. When the short blade was taken out and put on the counter again, it shot off back into the same wound. In the spring of 1879, Esther travelled to St. John in New Brunswick at the invitation of a military officer. Here, a party of scientifically minded men decided to study the girl, and even developed a new method of communicating with Esther's unwanted tag-along. After asking the entity a question, they would recite the alphabet and wait for the thing to knock at the appropriate letter, repeating this procedure until the entire answer was spelled out. Using this method, the spirit gave the name Bob Nickel. The ghost even claimed to have worked as a shoemaker when he was alive. To the surprise of the gentleman, other spirits also began to make themselves known. One ghost identified herself as Maggie Fisher, while another called himself Peter Cox and claimed that he was a relative of Esther's who died about 40 years before. Later on, 3 more spirits came forward, who were Mary Fisher, the sister of Maggie Fisher, Jane Nickel and Eliza McNeil. Esther eventually returned home, where the activity continued. Now, it's worth noting that demonic forces are believed to lie and pretend to be the spirits of others in order to gain the trust of those they are tormenting. At this point, the case had sparked the interest of an American actor named Walter Hubble, who had just finished a theatrical tour. He moved into the Teed house, hoping to prove the story was a hoax, and secretly planned writing about it. Over the next 6 weeks, however, Hubble was pelted with objects, saw household items vanish and reappear as if dropped from the ceiling, watched objects levitate, and witnessed several fires break out spontaneously. Hubble realised that the only day the spirit had off was on the Sabbath, the day of rest and worship. It seems that even the supernatural need a lazy Sunday to just chill out. It's just a shame Netflix and Domino's hadn't been invented by then. Hubble became convinced that there was no possible way that Esper could have pulled off the activity as a prank, and decided to use the same communication techniques that were used before to speak with the ghosts. As a test, the ghosts accurately told him the time from his watch and guessed how many coins he had in his pocket. Hubble then asked the entities the following questions, which they answered with clear knocks. Have you lived on Earth? Yes. Have you seen God? No. Are you in heaven? No. Are you in hell? Yes. Have you seen the devil? Yes. The terrifying activity continued until the summer, when Esther Cox decided to leave the cottage for good to protect her family. After going on a speaking tour with Hubble, where she was often heckled as a fraud, the girl returned to live with her friend. Soon after she arrived, however, the family barn burnt down and Esther was accused of arson. She was even sentenced to 4 months in prison, but was released after a month for good behaviour. After her release, Esther married a man who would visit her in prison, and the paranormal activity suddenly stopped for good. So, was this an elaborate hoax pulled off by a strange girl in some incredibly inventive ways to fake a haunting and trick everyone around her? Or was it a demonic spirit looking to claim her soul and eventually gave up? Let me know in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this video and would like to watch more supernatural and paranormal content, please make sure to hit the subscribe button and ring the notification bell. And if you have any friends who might also like this kind of content, please share the video as well. And until next time, sleep well, friends.
Blue skies, there's nothing warmer. Won't you feel happy to be sharing the sunshine with me under those blue skies?